Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 FM. I'm Paul Kretschmer. My guest today is Marc Fitch from the Yankee Institute, an investigative reporter. He will discuss the State Pier renovation project in New London, how it contributes to a wind farm creation in Long Island Sound, and about some of the details that are not readily available.
Well, yeah, basically what the situation is that the work to be done on the State Pier, and just for your listeners, the State Pier is being redeveloped so that it can be a construction station, essentially, for an offshore wind farm that's being created by Eversource and Danish company Ørsted, known as Renovation Wind, and they need a staging area so they can put together the wind turbines and get them out in the ocean and everything like that. So the State Pier needs to be reworked to handle that job. Now, there are Connecticut companies that can do this work. Some of it has to be marine-based, so there aren't a lot of companies that can do it, but they are here in the state. What happened, though, was the Connecticut Port Authority put a project labor agreement on the bid. So when they put the project out to bid, they said it has to include a project labor agreement. Now, a project labor agreement essentially guarantees that no non-union company is going to bid on this, because for a project with a project labor agreement, you have to abide by union rules and you have to hire union workers to do the work. So even if you're an open shop, even if you're a contractor who, has their own employees and doesn't, they aren't unionized or anything like that, you would still have to pay union benefits. You would still have to abide by union rules. You'd have to jump through all these hoops that they're not necessarily used to jumping through, and it costs them a lot of extra money, so they don't bid on it. So when the project labor agreement was put on this bid, it essentially knocked out any other contractor in the state that would be willing to do this work. And since then, the two finalists for the job are both out-of-state companies. I think one's based in New Jersey, the other one's based in Nebraska or something like that. So it's one of the issues with the project labor agreements is it's kind of a big gimme to the labor unions in Connecticut. They're very politically active and really put a lot of money into getting governors and lawmakers elected. But it's also, all studies have shown that project labor agreements tend to increase the cost of the project because you have to abide by all these union rules. You have to pay all these different benefits and things like that. So it could potentially increase the cost of the project, which is already at $157 million, with the state of Connecticut footing half the bill and Eversource footing the other half. So obviously this was a bit of a problem for the non-union contractors, and the Connecticut Building Association submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Connecticut Port Authority saying, all right, well, what did you do to determine the project labor agreement was necessary for the State Pier? Because under state statute, you can only use a project labor agreement when it's determined to be in the public's best interest. And the Connecticut Port Authority did not have any documentation saying why, how they reached that determination, why a project labor agreement was necessary for this work, how it would be in the public's best interest. So that, when you don't have that, when it's just, this is going to be good for the public because we say so, well, it does, to quote Chris Frixell, who I interviewed for the article and who filed the FOI, he said, it makes it seem like more of a political decision than one based on public interest. So that's the situation at the pier with the project labor agreement. So you could be looking at potentially increased costs, but also no real backup as to what qualifies as in the public's best interest. And taxpayer funds are supposed to be used wisely and efficiently, is this the best use of it, and is this therefore in the public's best interest?
In a way, it mirrors the former Connecticut partnership that Governor Ned Lamont got into a year and a half ago, which ended rather abruptly when it was decided by the donors that they did not want to be open to public scrutiny as the public expected them to be, and which many legislators had raised their voices about the lack of accountability because they had no way of knowing what was going on necessarily. Decisions were made without their knowledge beforehand, and the whole thing came to an end.
Yeah, no, it could be seen as similar to that. But one thing that I think we've been seeing under the Lamont administration is a preference for using project labor agreements. It's somewhat understandable, being that the unions really helped push him towards campaign victory during his gubernatorial campaign. And a prime example is during the whole tolls debate. They came out and announced that over $19 billion worth of state infrastructure projects would all be completed using project labor agreements before they even had the tolls bill passed. And obviously they never passed it, but that was part of the lead up. Is we're going to put tolls on the highways. It's going to fund all these different projects, which add up to about $19 billion. And before we even put it out to bid, before we even try to determine whether or not this would be in the public's best interest, we're going to put them all under a project labor agreement. And that would have been a huge, that would have been the lottery win for, the construction unions, the different unions throughout the state. And so the administration has shown a real preference for using these project labor agreements.
On a practical level, Mark, is there any way to move this kind of thing out of the political arena and into some sort of inspector general or civil service circumstance of some kind? I know that probably the sides who are reaping the benefits of the current system would be opposed to it. But what about the rest of us, like taxpayers, for instance, who really are looking for good public works projects to be completed, but not at the adverse result for those who have to pay for them in the end?
Yeah, I think part of the problem might be that there wouldn't really be much of an argument for a project labor agreement to be used ever. There are, my understanding is that the state will occasionally do a study to see if a project labor agreement is warranted. But it's one of those kind of wink, wink, nod, nod things. If you want the study to say that a PLA is necessary on a project, you can come up with that pretty easily. It doesn't take a whole lot of finesse to work that out. So I think part of the fear is among the political class is that if you did that, any inspector or determining study would pretty much find that you can get the same work done probably for cheaper if you just use any able-bodied contractor in the state who doesn't necessarily have to be union. And that would be a large detriment to the Connecticut's labor union. So I can't picture that happening anytime soon. I think that is something that is necessary. If you're going to tell us that something is in the public's best interest, you should at least have an independent way to show us that it's in the public's best interest, especially when you're talking about costs can be increased by up to 19%, which a study out of Massachusetts found for Connecticut schools. And that's a whole interesting study right there.
Well, thank you for your observations and for the research that you've done on the people you've spoken to so far on this whole situation, Marc Fitch.
Thank you, Paul.
For further information about what you heard from Marc Fitch from the Yankee Institute, call us at 860-346-1049. That's 860-346-1049. The opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of the station. I'm Paul Kretschmer on the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from WIHS.